Every fight I picked with you was actually a test you didn't know you were taking. Not because I wanted to hurt you, but because I needed to see how you'd handle conflict before I could trust you with my heart. For months, I created situations to measure your character when things got difficult. Understanding why win and test isn't about passing or failing. It's about recognizing fear disguised as challenge. I'm going to show you the 5 signs that she's testing you and why each one is actually a request for emotional safety. Sign number 1. She starts questioning your consistency in small ways, not because she doubts you, but because consistency feels too good to trust without verification. The first sign I was testing you looked like nitpicking, but it was actually me trying to find proof that you were as reliable as you seemed. When you said you'd call at 8 p.m., instead of just waiting, I'd mention it 3 different times throughout the day. So you're still calling tonight. What time did you say you'd call? You haven't forgotten about our call, right? I wasn't being needy. I was creating multiple opportunities for you to either confirm your reliability or reveal that your promises weren't actually promises. If you showed up 15 minutes late to meet me, I wouldn't get angry about the time, but I'd watch how you explained it. Were you apologetic? Did you take responsibility? Did you seem to care that I'd been waiting? I was studying your response to minor disappointments to predict how you'd handle major ones. When you canceled plans last minute due to work, I'd say, "No problem, I understand." But then spend the next 3 days analyzing whether you offered to reschedule immediately, whether you seemed genuinely upset about disappointing me, whether you made extra effort the next time we got together. Each small inconsistency became data in my ongoing assessment of whether you were someone I could depend on. My therapist helped me understand this as reliability testing through micro situations. When someone's consistency feels threatening because past experience has taught us that consistency doesn't last. The questioning wasn't about you not being good enough. It was about me needing evidence that good enough was sustainable, not just a temporary performance to win me over. My stomach stays in knots during this period because I'm simultaneously hoping you'll pass these small tests and terrified of what I'll do with my feelings if you do. Understanding this sign, when she questions small promises, she's not being paranoid. She's gathering data about your character under pressure. The kindest response is patient consistency, not defensive explanations. But consistency testing was just the beginning of my evaluation process. Sign number 2. She creates minor conflicts to see how you handle disagreement, because how you fight reveals more about your character than how you love. The second sign I was testing you looked like picking fights over nothing, but I was actually studying your conflict resolution style to predict our future. A few weeks into this pattern, I disagree with your movie choice just to see your reaction. Not because I cared what we watched, but because I needed to know if you'd listen to my preferences, try to convince me, get frustrated with my pickiness, or genuinely want to find something we'd both enjoy. Your response to minor preference conflicts became my blueprint for understanding how you'd handle major life decisions. When I'd express an opinion that contradicted something you'd said earlier, I wasn't being argumentative. I was testing whether you could handle being challenged without becoming defensive, dismissive, or angry. Past relationships had taught me that men who couldn't handle small disagreements would eventually try to silence big ones. If I seemed unreasonably upset about you being late or forgetting something small, I was creating controlled stress to see if you'd comfort me, minimize my feelings, blame me for being too sensitive, or try to understand why something minor felt major to me. I needed to know if you were someone who stayed present during emotional moments, or someone who ran when things got complicated. What I learned later was that I was conducting emotional safety audits, using all conflicts to assess whether you were someone who could handle my whole personality. Not just the easy parts. The conflicts weren't about the surface issues. They were about discovering whether you were someone who would fight with me or fight for us when real problems arose. My nervous system had learned that people who can't handle small upsets definitely can't handle big ones. So I'd rather find out early, when the stakes were low. Understanding this sign, when she creates minor conflicts, she's not being difficult. She's assessing your emotional maturity and conflict resolution skills. The best response is staying calm, listening to her concerns, and showing that disagreement doesn't threaten your care for her. When conflict testing didn't give me enough information, I escalated to something more challenging. Sign number 3. She becomes emotionally unavailable at random moments to see if you'll pursue her or give up when connection requires effort. The third sign I was testing you looked like moodiness, but I was actually measuring your commitment level by making love temporarily harder to access. Around that time, I'd become withdrawn for no apparent reason. Not because I was actually upset with you, but because I needed to know if you were someone who would notice my distance, ask what was wrong, and put effort into reconnecting. Or if you were someone who would be relieved that I required less emotional energy and use my withdrawal as permission to focus elsewhere. When you'd try to make plans and I'd respond with, I don't know, maybe, I wasn't being indecisive. I was testing whether you'd accept my lukewarm response, try to understand what was making me hesitant, or put in extra effort to make spending time together feel appealing rather than obligatory. I needed to know if you were someone who would work to maintain our connection or someone who would let it fade when it stopped being effortless. During conversations, I'd become less responsive than usual. Shorter answers, less enthusiasm, fewer questions about your life. Not because I'd lost interest, but because I was studying whether you'd notice the change in my energy, ask if everything was okay between us, or adjust your own effort level to match my decreased availability. I developed physical tension headaches during this testing phase because I'm fighting against my own desire to be close to you, while simultaneously monitoring whether you'll fight for closeness when I make it less accessible. If you're watching this because someone's emotional availability has become inconsistent and confusing, subscribe now. What I reveal next shows how these tests can escalate when they're misunderstood. What it was really doing was availability testing, using temporary emotional distance to measure your investment level and determine whether you were someone who would pursue connection or someone who would let it slip away when it required initiative. The withdrawal wasn't rejection. It was research into whether you were someone who would show up for our relationship, when showing up meant more than just being physically present. Understanding this sign, when she becomes emotionally unavailable without explanation, she might be testing your commitment level. The most helpful response is gentle persistence, noticing her withdrawal, asking caring questions, and showing that her emotional presence matters to you, without pressuring her to explain herself immediately. But emotional availability testing was just preparation for the most revealing test of all. Sign number 4. She mentions other men's attention or interest to gauge your reaction. Not to make you jealous, but to understand how you handle the reality of her desirability to others. The 4th sign I was testing you looked like making you jealous, but I was actually studying your security level and trust capacity when faced with reminders that other people wanted what you had. By that point, I'd casually mention when other guys asked me out. Not because I was interested in them or wanted to hurt you, but because I needed to see if you'd become possessive and controlling, completely indifferent and detached, or confident enough to acknowledge that I was choosing you daily, despite having other options. When my male coworker would text me about work stuff, I'd mention it naturally. David asked if I could help with the Peterson project. Then watch your reaction carefully. Were you secure enough to trust my judgment? Did you ask controlling questions about David's intentions? Did you seem threatened by my professional relationships? I was assessing whether you were someone who trusted me or someone who would eventually try to limit my interactions with other men. If someone complimented me when we were out together, I'd tell you about it later. Not to make you feel insecure, but to see if you'd feel proud that you were with someone other people found attractive, or if you'd make comments about the other person's motives, my response, or whether I encouraged the attention. I needed to know if you were someone who would celebrate my appeal or resent it. What I was really doing was security testing, using reminders of external interest to assess whether you were confident enough in our connection to handle the reality that maintaining it required daily choice, not just initial attraction. The mentions weren't threats. They were opportunities for you to demonstrate that you trusted both my judgment and your own worth enough to handle being with someone who had options. My chest tightens every time I mention another man's attention, because I'm terrified you'll either not care at all or care so much that you'll try to control my social interactions. And both responses would mean we aren't right for each other. Understanding this sign, when she mentions other man's interest, he's usually not trying to make you jealous. She's testing your security and trust levels. The most attractive response is confident acknowledgement that she's desirable and grateful that she chooses you, without possessiveness or indifference. When all these tests still didn't give me the certainty I needed, I created the ultimate evaluation. Sign number 5. She creates a situation where choosing her is inconvenient or costly to see if you'll prioritize her when it's not easy. The 5th and most revealing sign I was testing you looked like being high maintenance, but I was actually designing scenarios where your commitment would cost you something to prove it was real. Eventually, I'd have an emotional crisis during something important to you, not because I planned the timing maliciously, but because I'd been waiting for a moment when comforting me would require real sacrifice. Skipping part of your friend's birthday party, leaving your family dinner early, missing the game you'd been excited about, to see if I mattered enough to you that you'd choose my needs over your wants. When you had a big presentation at work, I'd subtly increase my neediness that week. More texts, more phone calls, more requests for reassurance about us. Not to sabotage your success, but to see if you are someone who could maintain emotional availability for our relationship, even when your professional life demanded extra energy. I'd suggest plans that I knew would be expensive or time-consuming for you. Not because I needed elaborate gestures, but because I wanted to see if you'd find ways to make special things happen for me, express that you wanted to, but couldn't right now, or make it clear that investing significant resources in our relationship felt like too much to ask. What I discovered was that I was conducting priority testing, using inconvenient timing and costly requests to measure whether I was someone you'd sacrifice for or someone you'd accommodate only when it was easy. The inconvenience wasn't manipulation. It was data collection about whether you were someone who loved me enough to choose me when choosing me was difficult. I feel physically sick during these tests because I'm forcing you to prove something I wish I could just trust. But trusting without proof had hurt me too many times before. Understanding this sign, when she needs you at inconvenient times, she might be testing your priority level rather than being deliberately difficult. The most reassuring response is showing that she matters enough to warrant real sacrifice, while also setting healthy boundaries about what you can realistically provide. These 5 signs reveal the truth about testing behavior. Every test I gave you was actually a question I was afraid to ask directly. Will you still choose me when choosing me isn't convenient, easy, or guaranteed? The tests weren't about you being good enough. They were about me needing evidence that your feelings were deep enough to survive real-world challenges. Understanding why women test isn't about learning to pass every challenge. It's about recognizing that the testing comes from fear, not malice, and responding with patience rather than resentment. Here's what I wish I could have told you during all those tests. I'm not testing you because I want you to fail. I'm testing you because I want us to succeed. But I've learned that love without evidence of commitment is just hope. And hope without proof has broken my heart too many times. Some women test, not because we enjoy creating obstacles, but because we've learned that the men who can handle our full humanity, including our fears, are the ones worth keeping. The testing isn't about making love difficult. It's about making sure the love we're building can handle difficulty when it inevitably arrives. Do I regret testing you instead of trusting you? In some ways, yes. Do I understand why I needed proof before I could offer my whole heart? Finally, I do. Would I choose vulnerability over verification if I could do it again? That's what I'm learning to practice every day. If you're currently being tested by someone you care about, maybe they're not being difficult to push you away. Maybe they're being difficult to see if you'll stay anyway. Maybe the kindest thing you can do is recognize that their tests are requests for reassurance disguised as challenges, and respond with patient understanding rather than frustrated resistance. And maybe the most loving response is showing them through consistent actions that they don't need to test what you're already committed to giving. But how do you balance being understanding with protecting your own emotional energy? How do you respond to tests without enabling endless testing? These questions don't have simple answers. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do is set boundaries about what kinds of proof we're willing to provide, while still showing up with genuine care. If you want to understand more about what happens when someone pulls away right after getting closer, watch my video, What to Do When She Pulls Away After Getting Closer. That video will show you exactly how to respond when emotional intimacy triggers retreat, and why understanding the psychology behind push-pull behavior can help you maintain connection without losing yourself.